The air in Dr. Aris Thorne's small apartment was thick with the scent of roasted coffee and the quiet hum of his ancient air purifier. Dust motes danced in the lone beam of sunlight slicing through the blinds, illuminating a meticulously organized life. Every item seemed to have its place, from the stack of astrophysics journals on his bedside table to the precisely aligned spices in his kitchen. Aris was a man of order, a quality that had served him well in his career as an astrophysicist and more recently as a prime candidate for the lunar mission. His eyes, usually keen and focused, were currently fixed on a small, unassuming object on his desk. A cassette tape. It wasn't some cutting-edge data chip or a holographic projection. It was a relic from a bygone era. Its plastic casing slightly scuffed. The paper label faded at the edges. The title, printed in bold, slightly stylized letters, read, Elvis Presley, his hand in mine. Gospel hymns? Of all the things he could take to the moon, thousands of books, gigabytes of music, personal photos, advanced scientific instruments, Aris had chosen this. Only one personal item was allowed, a strict NASA rule meant to limit weight and distraction. Other astronauts packed pictures of their families, a lucky charm or a favorite childhood toy. Aris had picked Elvis. He knew what people thought, what they'd say if they knew. Dr. Aris Thorne, the brilliant but reserved scientist bringing a gospel album to the moon. It was certainly unconventional. He imagined the bewildered looks, the quiet whisper. His colleagues, with their jazz collections and classical music, would raise an eyebrow. His commanding officer, ever practical, would probably just nod, assuming it held some profound personal significance he wasn't privy to. And they would be right. It did. The cassette wasn't just a random pick. It was a lifeline, a whisper from a past that felt increasingly distant as the launch date loomed. It smelled faintly of his grandmother's old sitting room, of lavender and worn velvet. He could almost hear her voice, sweet and frail, humming along to Amazing Grace as she rocked in her armchair, sunlight streaming through lace curtains. Aris had been a quiet child, more comfortable with equations and constellations than with playground games. His parents, both engineers, encouraged his intellectual pursuits, but sometimes struggled to connect with his intensely private nature. It was his grandmother, Nana Rose, who understood. She wasn't interested in his calculus, homework, or his theories about dark matter. She was interested in his heart. When he was 12, his parents had gone through a particularly rough patch. The house felt like a battlefield of hushed arguments and strained silences. Aris, caught in the middle, retreated further into himself, finding solace in the vastness of space. But even the stars seemed distant and cold during those months. Nana Rose, sensing his distress, had simply played the Elvis gospel album. She didn't preach, didn't offer platitudes. She just let Elvis's rich, comforting voice fill the room. Aris remembered sitting on the floor, leaning against her knees, the music washing over him. Songs like Crying in the Chapel and How Great Thou Art weren't just melodies, they were a balm. They spoke of hope, of resilience, of a quiet faith that somehow things would be okay. They weren't overtly religious to Aris. They were simply profoundly, beautifully human. Elvis, the king of rock and roll, singing hymns. It was an unexpected combination, yet it worked. There was an honesty, a vulnerability in his voice when he sang gospel that Aris didn't always hear in his rock anthems. It was Elvis stripped bare, pouring his soul into songs that offered comfort and peace. Now, years later, as he prepared to leave Earth, that same need for comfort was surfaced. The moon wasn't just a scientific objective. It was an unknown, desolate frontier. He was going to be more alone than he had ever been in his life. Millions of miles from the nearest familiar face, the silence of space stretched out daunting and endless. He picked up the cassette, turning it over in his fingers. The weight of it, insignificant as it was, felt immense. It wasn't just plastic and tape. It was a piece of home, a tangible link to a love that had always been unconditional. It was Nana Rose's gentle hand on his shoulder, a silent promise that even in the vast cold emptiness of space there would be a melody, a voice to remind him of warmth and hope. The final pre-flight checks were scheduled for tomorrow. His bags containing his flight suit, a few personal hygiene items, and meticulously prepared scientific equipment were already packed and waiting for transport. All except one small space reserved for his single personal item. Aris carefully placed the cassette into a small, padded, vacuum-sealed pouch. He double-checked the seal, then placed it gently into the designated slot in his personal gear bag. Felt like he was tucking away a secret, a quiet rebellion against the clinical sterility of space travel. This wasn't about data or discoveries. It was about the human heart, its need for connection, even across the void. He looked around his apartment one last time. The ordered precision that usually brought him comfort now seemed to mock him slightly. Soon, he would be surrounded by the beautiful chaos of the universe, a silent symphony of stars and nebulae. And yet in that silence he knew he would crave a different kind of music. A human voice, a small knowing smile touched his lips. Elvis Presley the King was coming to the moon, and in his hand Aris knew was a gospel album that would carry him through the longest, loneliest journey of his life. He felt a quiet sense of readiness, a calm spreading through him. The choice had been made, and he knew deep in his core it was the right one. The day of launch was a blur of controlled chaos. Every moment was meticulously scheduled, every action rehearsed countless times. Aris moved through it all with practiced calm, a strange mixture of adrenaline and focused serenity coursing through his veins. He remembered the feeling of the heavy insulated flight suit, the smell of recycled air in the shuttle, the last handshake with his commander. A firm grip that conveyed both encouragement and the gravity of the mission. Strapped into his seat, the vibrations from the mighty engines began to rumble through his entire body. It wasn't just a sound. It was a physical sensation, a deep tremor that shook his bones and rattled his teeth. Countdown echoed in his helmet, a disembodied voice ticking away the final seconds to an unprecedented journey. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. A deafening roar erupted, and Aris was pressed back into his seat with incredible force. The G-forces were immense, making it hard to breathe, making his vision tunnel slightly. To the viewport he saw the ground rapidly recede, blurring into a patchwork of greens and browns. The sky, minutes before a familiar blue, deepened swiftly, transitioning from azure to indigo, then to the inky black of space. He felt the powerful thrust of the rockets pushing him higher and faster, tearing him away from the comforting embrace of Earth's atmosphere. It was a brutal, exhilarating ride. Within minutes, the sensation of weightlessness began to settle in a strange, liberating lightness that defied everything he knew about gravity. He floated, his body feeling like a feather, even as the enormous vessel beneath him continued its relentless climb towards the stars. Once the main engines cut off and they settled into orbit, the true silence began. It was a silence unlike any he had ever experienced on Earth. Not the absence of sound, but an absolute void. A vacuum that swallowed every potential echo. It was profound, almost sacred, and incredibly unnerving. From the viewport, Earth hung like a magnificent blue marble, swirled with white clouds, radiating a gentle, living light. It was breathtaking, a sight he had dreamed of since he was a child. He felt a swell of profound awe, a deep, humbling realization of his place in the cosmos. But as the initial euphoria began to fade, the vastness of it all started to sink in. They were not just floating in orbit, they were hurtling through an endless expanse. A tiny, metallic speck against an infinite backdrop of stars. The Earth, his home, grew smaller and smaller, with each passing hour, eventually becoming a distant, shimmering jewel. His crewmates, brilliant and dedicated, were focused on their tasks, their movements precise and economical in the zero-G environment. They communicated in clipped, professional tones, their voices filtered through comms. Aris found himself withdrawing not from any personal animosity, but from a growing sense of isolation that was settling in. He was surrounded by people, yet he felt utterly alone. He thought of the moon, their destination still days away, a barren pockmarked sphere patiently waiting in the darkness. He imagined the silence there, even deeper, even more absolute than the silence of open space. His thoughts drifted back to the cassette, tucked away in his personal gear bag. He hadn't touched it since packing it, hadn't even consciously thought of it amidst the chaos of launch. But now, in the quiet of the transit, with the Earth shrinking behind them, and the moon still a distant goal, its presence felt like a small, comforting weight. He spent the first few days adjusting to the routines of space travel, eating freeze-dried food that tasted vaguely of cardboard, sleeping strapped into a small bunk, performing the initial systems, checks, and scientific experiments. Each movement was deliberate, each task meticulously planned. There was little room for personal reflection, for idleness. But late at night, when his shift was over and the lights in the crew quarters were dimmed, when the soft whirring of the life support systems was the only sound, the loneliness would creep in. He'd stare out of the small porthole at the galaxies, swirling like spilled milk across a velvet cloth, at the billions of stars, each one a distant sun, and he would feel profoundly small, profoundly separated. He remembered a quiet evening at home, just before he left. His parents had hugged him tight, their eyes brimming with a mixture of pride and fear. Nana Rose, too frail to travel, had called. Her voice, thin and reedy, had reminded him, "Aris, even when you're far away, there's always a song that can bring you home." He had understood what she meant then. Now, floating in the boundless void, her words echoed with a new, deeper meaning. The cassette felt less like a personal indulgence, and more like a necessary tool for survival, for maintaining a fragile thread of sanity. He wasn't afraid of the mission itself or the dangers of space. He was afraid of the profound, crushing isolation that could chip away at a person, leaving them hollow. He knew he wouldn't play it yet. Not here, not now. Surrounded by the mechanical whirring and the quiet movements of his crewmates, the moment needed to be right. A private ritual. He was saving it like a precious potion, for when the silence became too loud, for when the vastness threatened to overwhelm him completely. The journey to the moon was long measured in days that blurred into each other. He watched Earth recede further, becoming a smaller and smaller disk, until it was just another bright point of light among billions. The moon, conversely, grew larger, its familiar craters and Maria becoming clearer, more defined. It loomed magnificent and forbidding, a stark white orb hanging in the blackness. He thought of the desolate landscape awaiting him, the absolute vacuum, the footprints of previous explorers forever preserved in the dust. And he thought of Elvis, the king of rock and roll, whose voice had brought comfort to millions on Earth, now poised to whisper peace into the profound silence of the lunar surface. The irony wasn't lost on him, nor the quiet hope it instilled. He was ready for the moon, but he was also ready for the comfort that only a familiar voice could bring. The descent to the lunar surface was a ballet of precision and controlled power. Aris, strapped into his pilot's seat, felt the familiar rumble of the engines as the lunar module, nicknamed the Heron for its graceful, long-legged appearance, began its final approach. The moon, which had been a distant, beautiful sphere for days, now filled the entire viewport, its ancient pockmarked face looming closer with terrifying speed. Dust plumes erupted as their thrusters fired, kicking up a fine gray powder that looked like smoke in the vacuum. The silence outside was absolute, but inside the Heron the comms crackled with the clipped urgent voices of Mission Control and his fellow astronaut, Captain Eva Rostova, who was calling out altitude and velocity readings. Then, with a gentle shudder that resonated through the floor of the module, they touched down. A soft thud, barely perceptible, followed by the immediate exhilarating silence of success. "Contact," Eva's voice, usually calm, held a hint of triumph. "Roger that, Houston. The Heron has landed," Aris responded, his own voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline. He took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. They were here on the moon. The initial hours after landing were a frenzy of activity. Checks, double checks, power-up procedures, environmental readings. Every system had to be verified, Every switch flicked, every data point logged. They were setting up their temporary home, making sure it was habitable, a fragile bubble of life against the harsh lunar environment. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the immediate tasks were completed. The module was stable, the life support systems humming efficiently, and a preliminary communication link established with Earth. Aris felt a bone-deep exhaustion settle over him, but also an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. It took a moment, a rare luxury, to look out of the viewport. The view was stark, breathtaking, and utterly alien. A vast, desolate plain stretched out before them, bathed in the harsh, unforgiving light of the lunar day. The sky was a profound, inky black, peppered with unblinking stars. Even with the sun blazing overhead, there was no atmosphere to scatter light, no blue sky, no clouds, only an eternal twilight against a velvet void. The ground was a uniform gray, covered in fine dust and littered with rocks of various sizes, casting sharp, defined shadows that seemed to stretch into infinity. The craters, so familiar from earthbound telescopes, were now immense, silent chasms, their rims stark against the horizon. There was no wind, no sound, no life. Just an ancient, untouched stillness that pressed in on him. It was magnificent, truly, a testament to human ingenuity and ambition, but it was also profoundly lonely. The silence outside was absolute, a heavy blanket that muffled any sound, any echo of life. He imagined stepping out onto that surface, hearing nothing but the quiet hiss of his own breath inside his helmet. Ava, ever practical, was already making notes in her log, humming softly to herself. Aris knew he should be doing the same, preparing for their first EVA, the spacewalk onto the lunar surface. But for a moment he just stood there, absorbing the profound reality of his location. Millions of miles from Earth, the furthest he had ever been from everything he knew. A familiar pang of longing, sharp and unexpected, twisted in his gut. It wasn't homesickness, not exactly. It was a deeper yearning for connection, for warmth, for the vibrant hum of life that Earth represented. Here on the moon there was only the cold, hard reality of rock and vacuum. His gaze drifted to his personal gear bag, still tucked securely in its corner. The padded pouch containing the cassette seemed to hum with an almost palpable energy. He hadn't brought a portable cassette player with him, knowing that all personal electronic needed to be rigorously tested and approved. Instead, the module had a small, built-in entertainment console, an older model that could play various media, including tapes, a legacy from an earlier mission's more relaxed rules. He had made sure of that detail during his mission training. He walked over to the console, his movements still a little clumsy in the lower gravity. He unzipped his gear bag, his fingers finding the familiar pouch. He took it out, feeling the slight give of the padding, the rigid outline of the cassette within. He held it for a moment, feeling its lightness, yet its immense symbolic weight. This wasn't just a cassette. It was a link to his grandmother, to his childhood, to a time when worries were smaller and comfort was as simple as a song. He remembered her face, lined with age, but always radiating a quiet strength. She had faced her own challenges, her own moments of profound loneliness, and she had always found solace in these hymns. He looked around the cramped lunar module. It was a marvel of engineering, a sanctuary in the void, but it was also a cold, metallic box. It needed something more, something human. He felt a sudden, intense need to fill this vast lunar silence with something meaningful, something that spoke of life and hope. He wanted to hear a human voice, strong and familiar, cutting through the sterile hum of the life support systems. Eva looked up from her log, observing him with a curious glance. "Everything all right, Aris?" He nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Just taking it all in, Eva, and thinking about adding a little atmosphere." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. He slid the small hatch open on the console, revealing the familiar slot for the cassette. His fingers, usually so steady during delicate scientific procedures, trembled slightly as he carefully inserted the tape. He pressed the play button. For a moment there was nothing but the whirring of the tape mechanism. Then a faint crackle, a soft hiss of static, and then a rich, warm voice filled the lunar module. A voice that had once captivated millions on Earth, now resonating in the profound silence of the moon. First notes were quiet. A gentle piano introduction followed by a choir. Then, Elvis Presley, clear as a bell, began to sing. The song was "Crying in the Chapel." And in that moment, the sterile metallic box on the moon became a little bit more like home. The first notes of "Crying in the Chapel" floated through the lunar module, a nihil counterpoint to the stark, silent landscape visible through the viewport. The sound quality was surprisingly good, a testament to NASA's robust if somewhat dated entertainment system. Elvis's voice, deep and resonant, filled the small space, a warm, unexpected presence. Aris leaned back against the bulkhead, closing his eyes for a moment. He hadn't realized how much he craved this sound, this human touch, until it was finally there. The sterile hum of the life support systems, which had become the monotonous soundtrack of his journey, now seemed to recede, replaced by the soulful melody, "His Hand in Mine." The album's title track followed. The harmonies were beautiful, the message simple and comforting. Aris found himself swaying slightly, his body adjusting to the lower lunar gravity. As if dancing in slow motion, he saw Ava glance over, a faint smile playing on her lips. She didn't say anything, just returned to her logbook, letting the music fill the quiet. She was a pragmatic woman, but she understood the unspoken need for human connection, even for a brief respite from the mission's intensity. The songs flowed one after another. "I believe," "Mansion over the hilltop," "In my father's house." Each one was a testament to a different kind of strength, a different kind of hope. Aris remembered how his Nana Rose would often sing along her voice, a soft counterpoint to Elvis's powerful baritone. He could almost smell the familiar scent of her sitting room, feel the comforting weight of her hand on his shoulder. He remembered one particularly difficult evening when he was a teenager. He'd failed a crucial math competition. A blow to his perfectionist nature, he'd locked himself in his room, humiliated and angry. Nana Rose, sensing his turmoil, had slipped the Elvis cassette under his door, played it begrudgingly at first, then with growing absorption. The song, "How Great Thou Art," had come on its majestic melody and powerful lyrics, speaking of something far grander than his personal failures. It had given him perspective, a quiet reminder that even when things felt shattered, there was still beauty and purpose in the world. It had been a turning point, a lesson in resilience. He hadn't fully understood until now, floating on the moon. Here on the moon, with the vast empty expanse of space stretching out beyond the thin walls of his module, the music took on new meaning. It wasn't just comfort. It was an anchor. It reminded him that he was part of something larger than himself, part of humanity's journey, and that even in the most desolate places, the human spirit could find solace and beauty. He looked out the viewport. The lunar surface, which had seemed so stark and unwelcoming moments ago, now appeared different. Not less desolate, but imbued with a strange, quiet dignity. The sharp shadows, the endless dust, the silent craters, they were still there. But now they felt less menacing, more like a silent, ancient witness to his presence. Elvis sang "Amazing Grace," his voice soaring, powerful yet tender. Aris found himself humming along, his lips forming the familiar words. The melody resonated deep within him, touching a chord he hadn't known was so profoundly untuned. He realized with a sudden clarity that the loneliness he had felt during the transit, the gnawing emptiness, was starting to recede. The music was filling that void not with distraction, but with a quiet sense of belonging. He thought about the billions of people on Earth going about their lives, listening to music, sharing moments. He was profoundly separate from them. Yet in this small module he was connected by a song, by a voice, by a shared human experience that transcended the vast distances. He realized Ava had paused her work. She was just listening, her gaze fixed on the viewport, a faraway look in her eyes. Perhaps she too found solace in the unexpected soundtrack. Perhaps the music brought back her own memories, her own connections to home. The album played through its entirety, each song a gentle wave of comfort. When the last notes faded and the quiet whirring of the tape filled the silence again, Aris felt a profound sense of peace. The module no longer felt like a cold metallic box. It felt alive. It felt like a small, fragile bubble of humanity in the midst of the cosmic void. He knew the silence would return, that the challenges of the mission were only just beginning. There would be long évadés, complex experiments, and the constant pressure of performing flawlessly in an unforgiving environment. But now he had a tool, a secret weapon against the isolation. He didn't rewind the tape immediately. He let the quiet settle, letting the echoes of the music linger in the air. The silence now was different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the memory of Elvis's voice, a ghost of a melody that promised comfort when needed again. He stood up, his movements more deliberate, his mind clearer. There's plenty more where that came from. He gestured vaguely at the cassette player. He knew instinctively that this small, seemingly insignificant choice, bringing an old Elvis gospel album to the moon, was going to be one of the most important decisions of his mission. It was a piece of earth, a fragment of human warmth, a whisper of hope in the great silent expanse. And he knew with certainty that it would carry him through the rhythm of life on the moon quickly established itself. Days were marked by meticulously planned scientific tasks, geological surveys, setting up experiments, collecting samples of lunar regolith. Aris and Eva moved with practiced efficiency in their bulky spacesuits. During EVAs, their voices crisp and professional over the comms punctuated by the steady hiss of their life support systems. The lunar surface, beneath the relentless glare of the sun or the profound darkness of night, was a landscape of stark, unyielding beauty. But when the long hours of work were done and they were back inside the Heron, the quiet returned. It was a different kind of quiet now, less daunting than before. It was a quiet that waited to be filled, and Aris filled it almost every evening with the soulful voice of Elvis. The Elvis Gospel album became their unofficial mission soundtrack. Sometimes, Aris would play it softly in the background as they reviewed data or prepared for the next day's tasks. Other times he would put it on deliberately, sitting quietly, allowing the melodies to wash over him. Eva often joined him in these moments, her own work pushed aside, her gaze drifting to the silent moonscape outside. Each song seemed to resonate differently in this alien environment. Swing Down Sweet Chariot had a poignant yearning to it, a longing for something beyond their grasp. Working on the building felt like a silent anthem for their own monumental efforts, building a foothold for humanity on another world. For Aris, the music was more than just background noise. It was a portal. It transported him back to Earth, not just to his grandmother's house, but to specific moments, specific feelings. He remembered a time shortly after he decided to pursue astrophysics, when doubts had plagued him. The path was long, the competition fierce, the chances of success slim. He'd been overwhelmed, sitting alone in his small dorm room, staring at a textbook full of equations that suddenly seemed impossibly complex. He'd called Nana Rose, then feeling lost. She hadn't offered advice, just said, "Aris, remember the songs. Remember that voice. It's always there telling you to keep going, to have faith." He played the album that night, and somehow, the power in Elvis's voice, the unwavering belief in the lyrics, had quieted his anxieties. He had found a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet conviction that if he kept working, kept believing, he could achieve his dreams. It wasn't about religion. It was about resilience, about an inner strength that the music seemed to tap into. Now, on the moon, that same resilience was being tested daily. The challenges were immense. The constant vigilance required for life support, the physical strain of working in a pressurized suit The sheer mental fortitude needed to stay focused millions of miles from home. The moon itself was beautiful, but also relentlessly unforgiving. Every breath, every movement, every calculation was critical. The music became a form of psychological armor. It didn't make the challenges disappear, but it made them feel manageable. It reminded him that he was human, capable of both immense vulnerability and immense strength. Connected him to the billions of humans on Earth who had at some point found solace in a song, found hope in a familiar voice. One evening, after particularly demanding EVA that had involved a minor equipment malfunction and intense repair, Aris felt drained. His muscles ached and his mind buzzed with residual stress. He didn't even speak. He just walked to the console and pressed play. "How great thou art," began its majestic melody rising to fill the module. Aris leaned his head back, closing his eyes, letting the powerful chorus wash over him. He felt the tension in his shoulders begin to ease, the knot in his stomach loosen. He wasn't just hearing the song. He was feeling it deep in his bones, as if it were a physical force pushing back against the stress. He opened his eyes to see Ava, cross-legged on the floor, gently tracing patterns on a dusty console screen with her finger. She looked tired too, but her expression was one of quiet contemplation. "You know," Ava said, her voice soft, "I never really listened to Elvis gospel before this. I always thought of him as the rock and roll guy, the showman." She paused. "There's something profoundly comforting about this, especially here." Aris nodded, grateful for her shared moment of vulnerability. "It's different, isn't it? It's like he's just singing from his soul. No performance, just pure feeling." "Yeah," Eve agreed. "It reminds me of my grandmother, too. She used to sing old hymns while she baked, not Elvis, but the same kind of feeling. Simple, honest." She smiled a rare, genuine smile. It wasn't just his glimmer of home Emir. It was theirs. The shared experience, the unspoken understanding, added another layer of comfort to the music, transformed their sterile module into something more, something akin to a small floating chapel of solace. As the mission progressed, the album became a ritual. They'd listen during meals, during breaks, during the long lunar nights when the Earth hung like a distant luminous pearl in the black sky. It was a constant, gentle reminder of why they were here and what they were fighting for. Not just scientific discovery, but the enduring human spirit, capable of finding beauty and hope even on the furthest frontier. Aris knew that when he returned to Earth, the moon would forever be etched in his memory. But so too would the sound of Elvis Presley's gospel hymns, echoing in the profound silence, a testament to the power of music to bridge even the vast, lonely distances of space. Days on the moon settled into a focused, demanding rhythm. Aris and Eva were a well-oiled machine, their movements precise, their communication concise. They navigated the lunar module's confined spaces with ease, their bodies adapting to the low gravity. Outside, during their increasingly long EVAs, they traversed craters, drilled core samples, and deployed new scientific instruments. The lunar dust, fine as powder, clung to everything, a constant reminder of their alien environment. The scientific discoveries were groundbreaking. Every rock sample told a story billions of years old. Aris was exhilarated by the work, the thrill of unlocking the universe's secrets. This was what he had trained for, dreamed of for decades. Yet, as the novelty of the moon wore off and the routine became ingrained, the vastness of their isolation began to settle in a different way. It wasn't the initial shock of loneliness from the transit days. This was a deeper, more persistent hum of separation. They were two tiny specks on a lifeless world, millions of miles from the vibrant pulse of Earth. Communication delays meant conversations with Houston felt like shouting into a void and waiting for a delayed whisper in return. This was when the Elvis gospel album truly earned its keep. It wasn't just for moments of acute homesickness or stress. It became an integral part of their daily reflection, a grounding presence amidst the alien landscape. Every evening after the last data log was sent and the next day's schedule reviewed, Aris would carefully press play. Sometimes the album would play softly in the background as he cleaned his suit or calibrated equipment. Other times he would simply sit by the viewport, sipping lukewarm, rehydrated coffee, and just listen. Amazing Grace became his particular favorite during these quiet moments. Its enduring melody and powerful message of redemption seemed to resonate profoundly with the stark beauty of the moon. He would hum along, his voice a soft counterpoint to Elvis's. The familiar words felt like a quiet prayer, not necessarily religious, but a profound acknowledgement of the wonder and mystery of existence. He started to notice subtle shifts in his perception. The moon, once simply a scientific objective, began to feel like a silent companion. Craters weren't just geological formations. They were ancient scars etched by cosmic forces. The dust wasn't just regolith. It was the accumulated history of 1 billion years, waiting to be read. And in the profound silence, punctuated by Elvis's voice, he felt a deeper connection to it all. The music wasn't a distraction from the moon. It was a lens through which he experienced. It allowed him to find a meditative peace in the desolation, to see the beauty in its starkness, and to appreciate the profound privilege of being there. It allowed him to feel present, fully immersed in the moment, yet also connected to the enduring spirit of humanity. One lunar night, as the earth hung like a brilliant blue and white jewel in the distant blackness, Elvis sang, "Peace in the Valley." Aris watched Earth slowly spin its continents and oceans, a mesmerizing dance of light and shadow. He thought of all the lives being lived there, the joys and sorrows, the noise and clamor. And then he thought of the profound, almost spiritual peace of the moon, so silent, so still. He realized then that the peace Elvis sang about wasn't just a state of mind. It was a reflection of the universe itself, capable of both immense turmoil and immense tranquility. And here on the moon, he was finding a version of that peace mediated by a voice that had always brought him comfort. Eva, too, seemed to benefit from the nightly ritual. She became noticeably calmer, less prone to the subtle anxieties that space travel could induce. She would sometimes offer her own quiet observations, her voice softer than usual. "You know, Aris," she said one evening as "You'll Never Walk Alone played this album, it's like a warm blanket. No matter how cold it gets out there in here, it feels warm." Aris smiled. "That's exactly it, Ava. It's like a piece of the human heart, brought millions of miles to keep us company." He reflected on how often he had sought solace in music throughout his life. As a child, it was his grandmother's hymns. As a student, it was the classical music he listened to while studying complex theorems. Now on the moon, it was Elvis's gospel. Music, he realized, was a universal language, a bridge across time and space, a timeless companion for the human soul. His journal entries, initially filled with precise scientific observations and technical reports, began to include more personal reflections. He wrote about the profound silence, the surreal beauty of Earth from afar, and the unexpected comfort of the music. He described how the familiar melodies grounded him, reminded him of his purpose, and allowed him to find a deeper meaning in his solitary existence. The mission was far from over. There were still weeks of demanding. He was a human being carrying a piece of home, a voice of comfort, into the vast unknown. And in that familiar sound he found the strength to continue to explore and to reflect on the immense journey he was on, both physically and spiritually. The moon was no longer just a destination. It was a cathedral of silence, and Elvis was its unexpected, comforting choir. The mission had until now progressed with remarkable smoothness. Aris and Eva had become adept at their lunar routine, their movements fluid, their minds sharp. They had successfully completed numerous scientific objectives, and the data they were sending back to Earth was proving invaluable. But space, as all astronauts knew, was an unforgiving mistress. It started subtly. A flickering light on the main power console, then a low, insistent hum that hadn't been there before. Aris, meticulous as ever, immediately noticed. He consulted the system diagnostics, his brow furrowed. The hum was from the primary life support system, specifically a fan unit responsible for air circulation. "Eva, can you double-check the pressure readings on the primary environmental control unit?" Aris asked, his voice calm but with an underlying note of concern. Eva moved swiftly to the console, her fingers flying over the holographic interface. "Readings are fluctuating. Aris, not critical yet, but definitely unstable. It looks like a bearing might be seizing up." A seizing bearing in their primary life support fan was far from ideal. It meant reduced air circulation, potential overheating, and a significant drain on their limited power supply. Their backup system was robust, but relying solely on it for an extended period was a calculated risk. This wasn't a minor malfunction. It was a potential mission-critical issue. They immediately initiated a series of troubleshooting steps, following protocols that had been drilled into them for months. Contact with Houston was established and a flurry of technical discussions ensued. Communication delay, usually a minor annoyance, now felt like an agonizing stretch of time, each pause amplifying the tension. Hours blurred into a tense, exhausting battle against the failing system. Aris and Eva worked in tandem, their usual easy banter replaced by clicked instructions and focused silence. They tried reboots, manual overrides, even a gentle percussive maintenance tap, suggested by a veteran engineer in Houston. Nothing seemed to fully stabilize the fluctuating power readings or silence the ominous hum. Frustration began to mount. The lunar module, usually a sanctuary now, felt like a ticking clock. The pressure to fix the problem was immense. Their lives and the success of the mission depended on it. During a brief mandatory rest period, with the hum of the failing fan still reverberating through the module, Aris felt the familiar grip of despair tightening around his chest. He looked out at the moonscape, usually so captivating, now appearing menacingly indifferent. The profound silence outside seemed to mock their predicament, highlighting their extreme vulnerability. He felt a familiar gnawing sense of isolation, amplified by the stress of the malfunction. He was millions of miles from anyone who could offer a physical hand, a real-time solution. He was just a small human, relying on his training and a fragile machine to survive on an alien world. Eva, seeing the strain on his face, quietly walked over to the console. She didn't say anything. Instead, she reached for his personal gear bag, pulled out the familiar padded pouch, and without a word, inserted the Elvis cassette. She pressed play. The first notes of "You'll Never Walk Alone" filled the module. Elvis's voice, usually a comforting balm, now felt like a powerful anchor cutting through the rising tide of his anxiety. "When you walk through a storm, hold your head up high and don't be afraid of the dark." Aris closed his eyes. Letting the lyrics sink in, he imagined his grandmother's face. Her quiet strength. He remembered her unwavering belief, her gentle reminder that even in the darkest times there was always hope, always a path forward. The music didn't fix the fan, didn't provide a sudden solution to the engineering problem, but it did something just as crucial. It steadied his mind. It reminded him that panic served no purpose, that focus and resilience were what was needed. It reminded him of the human spirit's capacity to endure, to find strength, even in adversity. As Elvis's voice swelled into the powerful chorus, "Walk on, walk on. With hope in your heart and you'll never walk alone." Aris felt a surge of renewed determination. He wasn't alone. He had Eva, his brilliant colleague. He had Houston, a team of dedicated engineers working tirelessly to find a solution. And he had the quiet, comforting strength of a voice that had traveled with him across the void. He opened his eyes. The humming of the fan was still there, but it no longer felt quite so ominous. It was a problem, yes, a serious one, but a problem they could tackle. "Okay, Aris said, his voice clearer, more resolute. Let's go over the schematics for the secondary fan unit again. Maybe we can reroute some power or find a way to bypass the bearing if we can reach it. Ava nodded, her eyes reflecting a similar renewed focus. Good idea. Houston's still crunching numbers on a remote fix, but we need to explore all our options on our end. They resumed their work. The sound of Elvis's voice, a steady, quiet companion in the background. The music didn't eliminate the challenge, but it allowed them to face it with a renewed sense of purpose and a calmer mind. It was a tangible reminder that even when things seemed bleakest, there was always a glimmer of hope, a source of inner strength. And on the moon, millions of miles from home, that was the most vital piece of equipment they had. The fan unit was stabilized, though not fully repaired. Aris and Eva had managed a clever workaround, rerouting power and utilizing a more robust, though less efficient, secondary fan. The solution was temporary, a testament to their ingenuity under pressure, but it bought them critical time and ensured the mission could continue. Tension in the module had eased, replaced by the familiar hum of operational systems and a quiet sense of triumph. In the aftermath, Aris found himself reflecting deeply on the role the Elvis Gospel album had played. It wasn't just a comfort, it had been a psychological anchor during a moment of crisis. It had helped him push through fear and frustration, reminding him of resilience and hope. He realized that this music, a simple collection of hymns, had become an unexpected, profound part of his lunar journey. He looked at the cassette lying on the console, a small, unassuming object that held so much power. It wasn't just his story anymore. It was a story about humanity's enduring need for art, for solace, for connection, even in the most extreme and isolating environments. He thought of the future. What would people remember about this mission? The scientific discoveries, certainly. The challenges, overcome. But would they ever know about the quiet soundtrack that had sustained two human beings millions of miles from home? A thought sparked in his mind, audacious and compelling. He could leave a message, not just a scientific report, but a personal reflection. Something that captured this unique aspect of their journey, a testament to the unexpected power of a simple album. He approached Eva later that day as they were performing their routine checks on the moon rover. Eva, I've been thinking. She looked at him, her expression a mix of curiosity and fatigue. About what, Aris? More ways to optimize our dust filters? He chuckled softly. No, something a little less technical. I was thinking about the album and how much it's meant to us up here, especially during the fan incident. Ava nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on her face. It's been a lifeline, hasn't it? More than I ever expected. Exactly, Aris continued. And it occurred to me, when we leave the moon, when we return to Earth, this experience will be ours. But it feels like something more should be said. Something that captures the human side of this journey, not just the scientific. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I want to record a message, a short personal reflection to be sent back with our final data packet about the album, about what it means to have a piece of home, a voice of comfort on the moon. Ava considered this, her gaze drifting towards the console where the cassette sat. A message for Houston, or for anyone who might listen? For anyone, Aris clarified. For history, perhaps a small personal footnote to a grand mission to show that even in the vastness of space surrounded by silence, the human heart still yearns for beauty and connection. He felt the rare vulnerability in exposing such a personal desire, but Eva's reaction was one of understanding. She smiled, a warm, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. I think that's a wonderful idea, Aris, she said. A beautiful idea. Actually, it's not just about rocks and data up here. It's about us. About what we bring with us. They decided to record it that evening. After their shift, the module was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of interior light. Aris carefully placed the Elvis cassette back into the console, pressing play. He wanted the music to be in the background, a subtle, comforting presence as he spoke. He chose "How Great Thou Art" to play softly its majestic melody, a fitting backdrop. He activated the internal recorder, the small red light blinking steadily, took a deep breath, looking directly into the camera lens. "This is Dr. Aris Thorne, commander of the Ares, the 4th lunar mission recording on current lunar date." His voice was steady, professional. Then he paused, letting the music swell slightly. "We are here on the surface of the moon, conducting vital scientific research, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. It is an incredible privilege and a profound experience. Our silence here is unlike anything on Earth, vast, ancient, and absolute. But we are not truly alone in this silence. With us, we brought a piece of Earth, a small, unassuming cassette tape, Elvis Presley's gospel album, his hand in mine," he continued, his voice softening, a warmth entering his tone. He spoke of his grandmother, of the comfort the music had brought him as a child, and how it had become a profound source of solace and strength on the moon. He described the feeling of hearing Elvis's voice fill the module, transforming a sterile environment into a place of warmth and reflection. He shared how the music had helped them through moments of intense stress, like the fan malfunction, grounding them and reminding them of resilience, that a simple song can bridge the vastness between worlds, connecting us to home, to each other, and to something greater than ourselves. He paused again, letting the chorus of "How Great Thou Art" swell. "This music has been our companion, our anchor, and our quiet testament to the enduring power of hope. It reminds us that even when we feel utterly alone, we are always connected by the shared experiences of humanity, by the power of a voice, and by the timeless melodies that speak to the deepest parts of our souls. From the moon, with the enduring sound of Elvis, we send our message of gratitude, hope, and the profound beauty of human connection. Mission out," he pressed. "Stop." The red light extinguished. The music continued to play, Elvis's voice echoing in the quiet. Eva, who had been listening intently, walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "That was beautiful, Aris," she said, her eyes reflecting a profound understanding. "Truly beautiful." Aris nodded, a quiet sense of fulfillment settling over him. The message was sent a small personal whisper into the cosmic void, and he knew with certainty that it was a message that needed to be heard, a story that deserved to be told. The king of rock and roll had journeyed to the moon, and in doing so had left an indelible mark on 2 astronauts' hearts. The final weeks on the moon were bittersweet. The scientific objectives had been met, the experiments concluded, and the data packets prepared for return to Earth. Aris and Eva moved with a quiet efficiency, their actions imbued with the knowledge that each task was a step closer to leaving this remarkable desolate world. The lunar landscape, once a source of wonder and then of profound isolation, had transformed into something else entirely. It was now a place of shared experience, a silent witness to their triumphs and their anxieties, a backdrop to the quiet comfort of Elvis's voice. Aris found himself looking out the viewport, more often memorizing the contours of the craters, the patterns of the dust, the way Earth hung like a precious jewel in the eternal night. He knew he would never see it this way again. The Elvis Gospel album continued to be their companion, their nightly ritual. It was a soundtrack for packing, for final system checks, for long, reflective silences. Each song now carried the weight of their lunar journey, imbued with memories of scientific breakthroughs, challenging repairs, and moments of shared peace. Peace in the Valley felt particularly poignant. He thought of the vast, quiet valleys of the moon, so utterly devoid of life, yet now filled with the echo of his own experience, the profound peace he had found in its desolation. He had arrived, seeking scientific knowledge, but he was leaving with something far more profound, a deeper understanding of himself, of humanity's resilience, and the enduring power of simple human connection. Even when delivered by a voice from the past, one evening, as they were making the final preparations for departure. Aris carefully took the cassette out of the player. He held it in his hand, feeling its familiar weight. The plastic casing, which had once felt like a simple container, now felt like a repository of memories, a vessel for the solace it had provided. "Last listen before we store it away for the journey home?" Ava asked, her voice soft, mirroring his own sentimentality. Aris nodded. One last time for the road, he slid the tape back in and pressed play. He let it play from the beginning, letting the album unfold organically. A final farewell to their lunar home. As Elvis sang "Crying in the Chapel," Aris looked around the module. It was stripped bare now, all non-essential items. Packed, the consoles powered down to minimum. It looked more like the sterile metallic box it truly was, but it didn't feel that way. It felt like a small, cherished home that had protected them, nurtured them, and witnessed their growth. He thought of the message he had recorded sent off to Earth, a tiny ripple in the vast ocean of communication. He wondered if anyone would truly understand the depth of feeling behind it, the simple yet profound significance of an old gospel album on the moon. He hoped they would. Leaving the moon would be difficult. It was a unique, good experience. Unlike anything he would ever know again. He had faced its challenges, embraced its beauty, and found a quiet peace within its profound silence. He had arrived as a scientist focused on data and discovery, but he was leaving as something more, a traveler, a witness, a person deeply touched by the very human need for solace in the vastus. The last song played, "Where Could I Go But to the Lord?" Its hopeful, yearning melody filled the module one last time. Aris closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him, imprinting itself onto his memory of this place. When the final notes faded and the whirring of the tape ceased, the silence of the moon module returned, but it was a different silence now. Not empty, not daunting, but pregnant with meaning, filled with the echoes of Elvis's voice and the shared experiences of two human beings who had found unexpected comfort in its depths. Aris carefully ejected the cassette, gently placed it back into its padded pouch, securing the seal with a practiced hand. This time it wasn't going into his gear bag. He placed it in a special designated container for returned mission artifacts alongside the lunar rock samples and data chips. It was in its own way as precious as any scientific discovery. It was a testament to the human spirit. He looked at Ava, who was watching him, a knowing look in her eyes. "Ready, Commander?" she asked, her voice quiet. Aris nodded, a serene smile on his face. "Ready, Ava. Let's go home." The moon outside was still silent and indifferent. But inside, a small, profound piece of its history would forever be intertwined with the gospel hymns of Elvis Presley. They were leaving the moon, but they were taking a piece of its silent wisdom and its unexpected warmth back with them. And the king would forever be a part of their lunar legend. The journey back to Earth felt both impossibly long and incredibly swift. Aris and Ava watched as the moon, their temporary home, receded into the distance, shrinking from a looming orb to a distant white sphere, eventually becoming just another star in the vast cosmic tapestry. The return transit was quieter than the outward journey, filled with anticipation and a shared, unspoken understanding of the profound experience they had just lived. Re-entry into Earth's atmosphere was a fiery, tumultuous affair, a violent welcome back to gravity and air. Capsules shuddered. The heat shield glowed incandescently, and the G-forces pressed them hard into their seats once more. But this time it was a comforting pressure, a sign that they were coming home. Splashdown was rough, a jarring impact that sent spray high into the air. The smell of salt water, the rocking of the ocean waves, the distant sound of recovery teams approaching. It was overwhelming, exhilarating, and utterly real. The weeks that followed were a blur of debriefings, medical examinations, and a flurry of media attention. Aris and Eva were heroes, their mission a resounding success. They spoke of the scientific breakthroughs, the challenges overcome, the breathtaking beauty of the moon. But for Aris, the core of the mission, its true heart remained largely a private matter. He had mentioned the Elvis album in his recorded message, a small detail shared with Houston. He hadn't expected it to become a public sensation, but the snippet of his personal reflection leaked, perhaps intentionally, to a curious public, had resonated deeply. People were fascinated by the idea of the king of rock and roll finding solace on the lunar surface. It added a touch of unexpected humanity to the cold, hard science of space travel. During a rare, quiet moment in a post-mission interview, a young reporter asked him, "Dr. Thorne, about this Elvis Presley gospel album, it seems like a very unusual choice for a lunar mission." Aris paused, looking past the bright lights and the eager faces. He thought of Nana Rose, her quiet strength, thought of the profound silence of the moon, and the comfort of a familiar voice cutting through it. "It wasn't a choice for the mission exactly," Aris began, his voice calm, reflective. "It was a choice for myself, for the human element of the mission space. The moon, it's incredibly vast and profoundly isolating. There are moments when the silence can feel overwhelming," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "That album, those songs, they were a link to home, to my grandmother, who first introduced me. To them, they offered a kind of comfort. A reminder. Choose Elvis on the moon. It sounds strange, I know, but his voice singing those hymns brought a sense of peace, a quiet strength that was truly in vows from Earth, humanity's yearning for connection, for art, for something that transcends our physical limitations and endures." The reporter looked thoughtful, and Aris could see a flicker of understanding in their eyes. He knew his message had reached someone. The Elvis cassette, along with other mission artifacts, was eventually destined for a museum display. Aris visited it once, long after the immediate frenzy of the mission had died down. He stood before the display case, looking at the familiar scuffed plastic. It was nestled among lunar rock samples, mission patches, and technical instruments. But for him, it stood out, radiating a warmth that nothing else in the case could match. It was more than just an object. It was a tangible piece of his lunar journey, a symbol of the profound transformation he had undergone. The moon had taught him about the universe, but Elvis, on the moon, had taught him about himself, about the enduring power of the human heart. His life changed after the mission. He continued his work in astrophysics, but with a renewed perspective, a deeper appreciation for the interconnectedness of science and humanity. He found himself seeking out moments of quiet contemplation, listening to music more intently, appreciating the simple beauty of Earth's sounds, birdsong, the rustle of leaves, the laughter of children. He still had his own copy of the Elvis gospel album, carefully preserved at home. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, he would play it. The music no longer brought a pang of loneliness, but a wave of profound gratitude. It was a reminder of the silence of the moon. Yes, but also of the powerful voice that had filled it, turning desolation into peace, isolation into connection. Dr. Aris Thorne, the man who brought Elvis to the moon, carried that resonance with him always. It was a quiet secret shared with the universe, a testament to the enduring power of a song, a voice, and the simple, heartwarming truth that even in the vast, cold expanse of space, a piece of home and a melody from the heart could carry you through. The king had not just conquered Earth. He had found a quiet, profound echo among the stars.